Today, we are talking about something pretty incredible. It's the story of journalist Shane Bauer, who went undercover for 4 months inside a for-profit prison. He didn't just interview people. No, he actually took a job as a prison guard to see what really happens when a corporation's bottom line is in charge of people's lives. And what he found was a system stretched to its absolute breaking point. So when Bauer first called about the job, this is one of the very first things a recruiter from Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, told him. Now, I guess it was supposed to sound reassuring, but wow. As you're about to see, it was some seriously ominous foreshadowing. Okay, let's get into it. First step, the undercover guard. So you have to wonder, how on earth does an investigative journalist end up working as a guard at a medium security prison in the middle of rural Louisiana? Well, it really all came down to one thing: access. See, private prisons are like black boxes. They're notoriously secretive. CCA has even fought against laws that would make them open their books, in the same way that state-run prisons have to. So, to get past the polished PR tours and see the real, unvarnished truth, Bauer realized there was only one way in. He had to get hired. And yet, getting hired was ridiculously easy. I mean, this quote from the head of training at Wynn Correctional Center really says it all. They didn't care about his job history or that he was a writer or why he was suddenly moving all the way across the country for a job that paid $9 an hour. Nope, they just needed a warm body to fill a uniform. And that $9 an hour wage, that's not just some random number. It's actually a huge piece of this puzzle. To really get what was going on at Wynn, you have to understand the business model that was driving everything. Let's talk about the prison for profit. Okay, so check this out. That $9 wage at Wynn, that was $3.50 less per hour than what a rookie guard at a public state prison would make. And when nearly 60% of CCA's entire operating budget is just paying its staff, well, paying people less is the #1 way they save money. And that single decision has massive, massive consequences down the line. This really puts the scale of the whole operation into perspective. So at this one prison, Wynn, CCA was getting about $34 for each inmate every single day. Doesn't sound like a ton of money, right? But you multiply that by tens of thousands of inmates in all their prisons across the country, and suddenly it adds up to a staggering $1.9 billion in revenue in 2015 alone. So how does a company make sure a revenue stream like that keeps flowing? Well, this is where a really controversial idea comes into play. It's called an occupancy guarantee. At Wynn, the state of Louisiana had a contract that said they had to keep the prison 96% full. If the number of inmates dropped below that, the state had to pay CCA a penalty. I mean, think about that. It creates this powerful and you could say deeply troubling financial incentive to keep those beds full. So we've talked about the business model. But what does all this focus on the bottom line actually mean for the people living and working inside those walls? Let's take a look at life on the floor. Just look at this number. It's almost hard to comprehend. In the main housing units, there were almost never more than 2 guards on the floor at any given time. That works out to a ratio of 1 guard for every 176 inmates. 1 guard. And here's what that looks like. You've got these huge, long dorms. They call them tiers, and there are 8 of them in a single unit. And just 2 guards are supposed to be in control of everything and everyone inside. I mean, it's a recipe for absolute chaos. And living in that kind of constant, high-stress environment takes a devastating toll on the staff. Seriously, think about these stats. The source material cites research showing that 34% of correctional officers suffer from PTSD. That is a higher rate than soldiers coming back from combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Their suicide rate is 2.5 times higher than the general population. And, on average, they died 12 years earlier. The human cost for the guards themselves is just immense. This might remind you of the famous Stanford Prison Experiment. The psychologist Philip Zimbardo found that the prison environment itself is so powerful, it can totally warp people's behavior. That power dynamic can make good people do cruel things. It's this powerful reminder that even if you go in with the best intentions, a toxic system can just completely overwhelm you. So you've got understaffing, you've got low pay, and you've got extreme stress. What happens next? Inevitably, you start cutting corners. And inside a prison, cutting corners doesn't just mean a sloppy job. It can lead to violence. It can cost people their lives. Just look at this. In his first 2 months on the job, Bauer either saw or heard about at least 12 different stabbings. But when he looked at the official records that CCA reported to the state, they only reported 5 stabbings for the entire first 10 months of that year. That suggests a massive and frankly dangerous cover-up of just how violent it was in there.
This kind of neglect, it doesn't just stay inside the prison walls. It spills out into the courtroom. When you look at the most common lawsuits filed against CCA, you see a really clear pattern. We're not talking about random accidents. We're talking systemic failures. Inadequate medical care and unconstitutional prison conditions are right at the top, followed by things like assault and excessive force. All things that happen when a system cuts corners on basic human safety.
And here's another critical failure. The security was basically an illusion. Guards were just told routinely to falsify the security logs. They'd write down that they did their 30-minute checks of the tiers when, in reality, those checks almost never happened. It wasn't about actually providing safety. It was about creating a paper trail to make it look like they were. A system that's built on a foundation of neglect and deception can really only last for so long. Eventually, the outside world started to pay attention, and the whole operation started to come apart at the seams. You would just feel the tension inside win. At the same time, the Louisiana Department of Corrections started taking a much closer look. They cited a total lack of maintenance and huge failures in basic correctional practices. All of a sudden, wardens from public prisons started showing up unannounced for surprise inspections. And what they found? It was just shocking. During one raid of a single housing unit, guards found 51 homemade weapons, 51 shanks. In fact, based on the weapon confiscation data, Wynn was identified as the most heavily armed prison in the entire state of Louisiana. That is a terrifying distinction.
So the state finally had enough, and they laid down the law with a list of demands. But what's so striking is how basic this stuff is. They're not asking for fancy reforms. They're demanding the absolute fundamentals of running a safe prison. Fix the broken doors and cameras. Hire more guards, hire more medical staff, improve the training. Let the inmates have some recreation time. It was basically an admission that the entire system had completely failed.
In the end, the pressure was just too much. Faced with having to actually spend the money to fix all of these fundamental problems, which, of course, would have cut right into their profits, CCA made a business decision. Just 2 weeks after Shane Bauer's investigation ended, the company announced it was walking away. They voided their contract to run Wynn 5 years before it was even supposed to expire. For 4 months, Bauer got a first-hand look at what happens when the drive for profit completely overrules the basic needs for safety and human dignity, not just for the inmates, but for the officers who are paid to guard them, too. And this entire incredible investigation leaves us with one final and, I think, crucial question. When you look beyond the corporate balance sheets and the stock prices, what is the real human cost of a system like this?